Today I will going to report Arab Spring, Middle East, and North Africa. So the overview. The Arab Spring was a series of anti-government protests, uprising, and armed rebellions across the Middle East and North Africa that commenced in 2010. So it is also sometimes referred to as the Arab Spring and Winter, Arab Awakening, or Arab Uprisings, even though not all the participants in the protest were Arab. So it was sparked by the first protest that occurred in Tunisia on December 18 of 2010 in Sidi Bouzid following Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation in protest of police corruption and ill treatment. So, a major slogan of the demonstrators in the Arab world is Ajajab Yurid Iskat Anizam, or the people want to bring down the regime. So the term Arab Spring is an allusion to the revolutions of 1848, which are sometimes referred to as the springtime of nations or people's spring when political upheavals swept Europe. So ever since, spring has been used to describe movements toward democracy like Czechoslovakia 1968. Prague Spring was Western media been popularizing the term in 2011, the Arab Spring. So what are the causes? First, we have pressures from within. So the Arab Spring is widely believed to have been instigated by dissatisfaction, particularly of youth and unions, with the rule of local governments, though some have speculated that wide gaps in income levels and pressure caused by the Great Recession may have had a hand as well. So, ang Arab Spring daw kay na occur daw ni siya because of the instigated by dissatisfaction. Wala na nasatisfy ang mga youth o mga groups sa pag-run sa government or governments. So, some activists had taken part in programs sponsored by the US-funded National Endowment for Democracy, but the US government claimed that they did not initiate or participate of the uprising. Second, we have the social media. In the wake of the Arab Spring protest, a considerable amount of attention focused on the role of social media and digital technologies in allowing citizens within areas affected by the Arab uprisings as a means for collective activism to circumvent state-operated media channels. So the interference of social media during this time, or media, is a very kanang dako kay siya role to inform the people or to inform the world nga naay hit na hitabo sa ani nga region. So the use of social media platforms more than doubled in Arab countries during the protests with the exception of Libya. So according to the sources, some researchers have shown how collective intelligence dynamics of the crowd in participatory system such as social media has immense power to support a collective action such as foment a political change. So events leading up to the Arab Spring. So, it was sparked by the first protest that occurred in Tunisia on December 18 of 2010 in Sidi Bouzid following the Mohamed Bouazizi self-immolation in protest of police corruption and ill treatment. So, Tunisia experienced a series of conflicts during the 3 years leading up to the Arab Spring. So, the most notable occurring in the mining area of Gafsa in 2008, where protests continued for many months. So, in Egypt, the labor movements had been strong for years with more than 3,000 labor actions since 2004 and also provided an important venue for organizing protests and collective actions. In the case of Algeria, discontent had been building for years over a number of issues, like some claim that during 2010 there were as many as 9,700 riots and unrest throughout the country. So, because of this, the protest focused on issues such as education and healthcare while others cited rampant corruption because this seen kanang mga many major factors regarding within sa ilang country sa nga garampant na ang ilang mga problems and the government did not do anything nga masolusyonan to. So, in the case of Western Sahara, the Gzim Izik protest camp was erected 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles southeast of El Aaiún by a group of young Sahrawis on October 9 of 2010 because their intention was to demonstrate against labor discrimination and employment, looting of resources, and human rights abuses, and also including violence against Sahrawis in the aftermath of the protest was cited as a reason for renewed protests months later after the start of the Arab Spring. So, it is important to take note that the catalyst for the escalation of protests was the self-immolation of Tunisian Mohamed Bouazizi. And next, we have the Arab Spring. So, the Arab Spring caused the biggest transformation of the Middle East since decolonization. Why? Because by the end of February of 2012, rulers had been forced from power in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. So civil uprisings had erupted in Bahrain and Syria. Major protests had Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, and Sudan. So and had occurred in Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Djibouti, Western Sahara, and Palestine. So gi-classify na diri ang mga countries nga asa to ang pinaka-major o minor lang nga protest. So during this period, several leaders announced their intentions to step down at the end of their current terms. Like Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir announced that he would not seek a re-election of 2015. So he ultimately retracted his announcement and ran anyway. So as did Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, whose term was to immediately end in 2014, although there were violent demonstrations demanding to immediate resignation in 2011. So protests in Jordan also caused the sacking of the first successive governments by King Abdullah, and the popular unrest in Kuwait also resulted in the resignation of Prime Minister Nasser al-Sabah's cabinet. So during this time, mao daw ni ang time nga murag hapit na nila ma-achieve ang ilang goal to bring down the regime of the region. So the geopolitical implication of the protest drew global attention because some protesters were nominated for the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize Award. Like for example, Tawakkol Karman of Yemen was co-recipient of the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize due to her role organizing peaceful protest. In 2011, Time magazine named the protester its Person of the Year. So, Spanish Patanda won the 2011 Press Photo Award for his image of a Yemeni woman holding an injured family member taken during the civil uprising in Yemen on October 15, 2011. So, summary of conflicts by country. So, we have here a map that would indicate the summary of conflicts by country due to the Arab Spring, and the legend below the correspondence to the outcome. So for Egypt, violet and the map, their government were overthrown multiple times, while Tunisia in black, their government was also overthrown and leader was even in exile. Libya and Syria in brown experienced civil war, while protests and government changes were the outcome in Morocco, Western Sahara, Palestine, Jordan, Oman, and Kuwait, which are in cyan. Algeria, Sudan, Lebanon, and Iraq in orange were in major protest, while the minor protests were in Mauritania, Somalia, and Saudi Arabia, which were in light brown. And the rest in gray indicate minor protests and militant action outside the Arab world. So the long-term aftermath, sectarianism and collapse of the state system. So some trends in political Islam resulting from the Arab Spring noted by observers according to Kin, Mikam, and Tariq Osman include: first, we have the repression of the Muslim Brotherhood not only in Egypt by the military and courts following the forcible removal of Morsi from office in 2013, but also by Saudi Arabia and a number of Gulf countries, not Qatar. So here, the ambassadors also seriously threatened the Gulf Cooperation Council's activities adversely affected its functioning and could arguably even have led to its dissolution. So the rise of Islamist state building, where the state failure and has taken place most prominently in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, because Islamists have found that it easier than competing non-Islamists trying to fill the void of state failure by securing external funding, weaponry, and fighters, many of which have come from abroad and have rallied around pan-Islamic identity. So the norms of governance in these Islamist areas are militia-based, and the governed submit to their authority out of fear and also loyalty, other reasons, or some combination. The most expansive of this new model is the Islamic State, the new occurrence na niya. So increasing sectarianism, primarily Tunisia, at least in part of the proxy wars and the escalation of the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict. So Islamists are fighting Islamists. So across sectarian lines, in Lebanon, Sunni militants targeting Hezbollah position, like Yemen, between mainstream Sunni Islamists of Islah and the Said Zid Houthi movement in Iraq, and Islamic State and the Iraq Sikh militias. So increased caution and political learning in countries such as Algeria, Jordan, where Islamists have chosen not to lead major challenge against their governments. So in Yemen, al-Shia has sought to frame its ideology in a way that will avoid charges of militancy. So in countries where Islamists did choose to lead a major challenge and did not succeed in transforming society, particularly in Egypt, a disinterest in soul-searching. So about what went wrong in favor of antagonism and fiery anger, and a thirst for revenge, because partisans of political Islam, although this does not include some prominent leaders such as Raqid Ghannouchi, but is particularly true in Egypt, see themselves as a victims of injustice whose perpetrators are not just individual conspirators but entire social groups. So here are my conclusions, or the conclusion. A power struggle continued after immediate response to the Arab Spring, while leadership changed and regimes were held accountable. Power vacuums opened across Arab world because ultimately it resulted in a contentious battle between consolidation of power by religious elites and the growing support for democracy in many Muslim majority states. The early hopes that these popular movements would end corruption, increase political participation, and bring about greater economic equity quickly collapsed in the wake of the counter-revolutionary moves by foreign state actors in Yemen, and also the regional and international military interventions in Bahrain and Yemen and destructive civil wars in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. So, some have referred to the succeeding and still ongoing conflicts as the Arab Winter as of May of 2018. Only on the uprising in Tunisia has resulted in a transition of constitutional democratic governance. So, recent uprisings in Sudan and Algeria show that the condition that started the Arab Spring have not faded and political movement against authoritarianism and exploitation are still occurring. So in 2019, multiple uprisings and protest movements in Algeria, Sudan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Egypt have been seen as a continuation of the Arab Spring. So in 2011, multiple conflicts are still continuing that might be seen as a result of the Arab Spring. So the Syrian civil war has caused massive political instability and economic hardship in Syria, with the Syrian pound plunging the new loss in Libya. A major civil war recently concluded, with Western powers and Russia sending in proxy powers or proxy fighters. In Yemen, a civil war continues to affect the country. In Lebanon, a major banking crisis is threatening the country's economy as well as that of neighboring Syria. That would be all. Thank you.